Okay. Yeah, so I think we should just get going, and we can always just, if everybody's still on at the end, we can approve the minutes at the end. But in this way, Francisco can get going with his presentation. So thank you, everyone, for being here. We have a good agenda today, talk about city facilities, and I'm going to just let Francisco, hold on, I'm going to share the screen and jump right into it. And we'll we'll get going. Thank you, everyone. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, and just waiting for this to go into presentation mode. Can everyone see it?
Yep. Yes.
Sure. Good, good. Well, it's good to see you all again, and thanks again for dialing into the meeting today. As I've said this before, we can't do this very well without you. So thank you. This is, believe it or not, it's our 12th meeting. And we've really have made, believe it or not, as well, we've made a lot of progress in that time in terms of the information that we've put together and starting to get a sense for what the real issues and opportunities are in Danbury. And we're getting very close to the end of the discovery process. So let me jump into our agenda and schedule and show you where we're at. Our agenda for this afternoon's meeting is to review municipal facilities and services. And related to that are your school enrollment trends, because the school buildings are a huge footprint of the city's municipal facilities and are fairly resource intensive. So we want to take a look at those trends. And we want to discuss with you what you perceive to be municipal facilities and service needs. And you'll have a better sense for what I mean by that as we get into the presentation. We'll give you a brief update. Marcy will be joining the call shortly. She's coming off another meeting to update you on our public engagement work to date, including the online survey and some recent pop-up events we've done. And I'll give you a brief update where we're at conducting interviews with various departments and commissions, and talk also about our affordable housing plan progress, of which we had a committee meeting last night, or yesterday afternoon, I should say. Okay, municipal facilities. When we talk about facilities, we're really focused on buildings and campuses here. We've talked in a previous meeting about infrastructure, bridges and things, and wastewater treatment plant and utilities, things of that nature. So we've covered that ground, and here we want to focus on the facilities and the services that the city provides through many of those facilities, and that includes municipal buildings, libraries, fire stations, airport, parks and rec, school and school grounds, and the police department. And we may have missed some buildings or services there, but these are the general groupings that relate to departments across the city. And to break it out a little further, a city the size of Danbury has a lot of buildings and a lot of facilities and a lot of properties to provide services through and to maintain. Municipal buildings, the most obvious, are City Hall and big facilities like DPW, but there are multiple other municipal buildings throughout the city that the city has to maintain. And I had a conversation this afternoon with Sean Hanley at Public Buildings just about the scope of what they do and maintain in the city. School and school grounds, and as
Uh-oh, we freeze.
Uh-oh, he just froze.
Oh boy.
Wow.
Yeah, he'll be back.
Hey, yeah. Rory, you're on. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I think, I know Francisco, I'm sure will hop back on in a minute. Sometimes this happens. Yeah, so he was mentioning the schools and the school grounds. There's 13 elementary schools, 3 middle schools, 1 high school. We'll look at parks and recreation facilities, over 1,600 acres of parkland, municipal golf course. Oh, I just lost the presentation. I think it must be on his computer. We know there's the golf course, municipal buildings. Sorry, I'm trying to pull from the one slide.
And Sharon, I think you have to let
I-
back
yeah.
in.
I have
Sharon,
a,
do you have a copy of it?
I have a printout of it.
Oh.
I have
So
an
I could-
electronic, this is Marcy. I have an electronic version of the presentation. If I can share, if you want, I will share.
Yeah, why don't you do that? Because multiple, I have just a printout of it.
Okay, hold on. Let me see
Thanks,
how
Marcy.
I could start to talk through it, which is fine too. Do I have it? I don't think,
bear with
sorry,
me.
everybody. The glitch of technology.
Yeah.
It was on my slide, which was all the way at the end.
You were just jumping ahead.
All right, so how do I share my screen here?
You have to have it open
I
in a
do.
separate tab. Okay, so just go to screen share at the bottom, share screen.
Oh, dun, dun, dun. I'm here.
Hey, Sharon, sorry for being late. I was stuck in what I thought was the meeting room for a while, but Perry's here now. Sorry.
Oh, okay, now I got you. Okay, yep, there you are.
All right, let me just get to presentation mode.
Sharon, Francisco just emailed. He wants to be let back in.
Oh, I don't have anybody waiting. That's interesting. Oh, yeah, here he is. Sorry. It changes everything when you're in presentation mode. Let's see if I get.
All
him
right,
back.
I am back, and can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So, hey, Francisco,
Okay,
Francisco,
yeah,
you're
yeah,
gonna,
Marcy.
good
Are
thing
you
you sent me
sharing
the
your screen?
presentation. I'm sharing, but you're gonna have to start sharing again.
Okay. All right, no, let's do this, Marcy, so that we don't have.
oh,
Uh-oh.
Oh, he's got a really bad connection.
okay. I don't even show him as on. Do I?
All right, can you
There he
folks
is.
hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm gonna keep, obviously having an internet connection issue. I'm gonna keep my video off to minimize bandwidth. Marcy, can you just run the presentation from your computer?
I can until I have to log in remotely at 4:45.
Okay. Well, let's keep going. Hopefully things even out with my connection, and at that point I can just switch.
And
So
Rory, I just sent you a copy of the presentation too.
Oh, good. Yeah, if
yeah,
I
we got
have it,
lots
I
of
can.
copies to go around.
All right, we're good now.
Unfortunately,
everybody.
this week I'm the subject matter expert. All right. So where we left off is the city. I was trying to impress upon you that the city has a lot of facilities, including schools, parks and rec, fire stations, of which there are both city and volunteer fire departments, the main library, Long Ridge Library, airport, and the police department, along with animal control facility and a proposed substation at the Summit development. Next slide. All right, and we're still in the process of mapping these facilities. Public Buildings is sending me over a comprehensive inventory of this space. And once we get that, we'll finalize this mapping, but this gives you a sense as to where those facilities are distributed through the city. And most of them, as you might expect, are in the core of Waterbury, in the downtown area, and along major corridors like I-84, obviously with fire stations distributed a little more throughout the city. Next. City parks as well. The city has a lot of acreage of parks, and those parks contain a lot of different facilities. And when we say facilities in a park, it could be anything from an athletic field to a ball court to an indoor recreation facility to a spray pad or playground or PlayStation. So those facilities range quite a bit. And within those parks, of course, there are buildings as well. And the Parks Department just provided us with the comprehensive inventory, which we're in the process of going through for inclusion into the plan. And that will enable us to dive down a little bit deeper into what type of facilities the city has and compare it to some national standards. Next. With respect to the services that the city provides, this org chart came straight out of the city's budget book. And not all services are impacted by growth in the same way. In the Plan of Conservation and Development, it is a big responsibility for us in the plan is to anticipate how city services might be impacted by growth, so that we can adequately plan for what type of growth that the city can accommodate. And when we take a look at services, it's the more public-facing services that are more heavily impacted by growth. And those are those boxes that we circled there. And that is DPW and emergency management, public safety, police, fire, but also recreation. You know, more children in town, greater population, more programming needed. Planning and zoning, building inspections, library, permitting, health and human services, elderly services, veterans affairs, consumer protection, the neighborhood or the neighborhood unit team as well. So those are all the services that are more public facing and are affected by growth in the city. So as we develop this plan, we need to be mindful of the resources that those services might require with additional growth, and to figure out whether or not any of those services are at a tipping point with respect to the growth that the city has experienced over the past several years or decade. Next slide. All right, so all those behind all those services is municipal finance for very obvious reasons, and so I don't want to make any assumptions as to how municipally financially literate everyone is. So I'm going to give you a real quick primer so we're all speaking the same language here in the next few slides that we'll show you. Revenue, that is the funds that the city receives, most of that coming from taxes, property taxes, but also from fines, fees, grants, and any interest or dividends that the city has on investments. Expenditures, and that's everything that the city is paying out, right? Those are all the city's costs. The mill rate, which if you're a property tax owner, you're pretty sensitive to this, or a property owner paying taxes, you're sensitive to this. Danbury's happens to be 27.6. And that mill rate is equal to 1/1000th of a dollar. So if you have a property worth $100,000, you're paying $27.60 a year in property taxes, that being $2,760. Assessed value. The state sets the limit at which almost every single municipality in Connecticut can appraises their properties or assesses their properties. And that is 70% of the appraised value. And the appraised value is the closest thing to the market value. So 70% of that is taxable. So you take the mill rate times the assessed value, and that is the property tax on the property. And the grand list is the combined assessed value of all the properties in the city that are required to pay property tax. And as a reminder, nonprofit and government properties aren't required to pay property taxes. They're exempt. So that's minus those properties. That's the total taxable value. And then the tax levy is what's generated by that grand list. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see that as the grand list grows and goes up, and that can be through a couple of different mechanisms. either because you have new development, vacant or low value properties being redeveloped into higher value properties, the grand list will grow. Sometimes that happens through a revaluation where properties are reassessed, and because of market conditions, properties are worth more, so the grand list goes up. When the grand list grows up, revenue goes up, assuming that the mill rate doesn't fall, which means there's potential for increased expenditures so that the city can provide more services to offset growth in the city or to keep up with inflation. And there's also potential that the city can choose to hold the mill rate flat or even reduce it, which sometimes happens after a revaluation comes back with a much higher grand list potential. So these are all the forces that the finance department and the city is trying to balance in any given budget, these different forces, and growth has an impact upon growth is a variable in this equation and has an impact on finance. Next slide. So if we take a look at where Danbury's revenue comes from, most of it, 82.5%, is coming from property tax. And that's real property. That's both buildings and land and cars and anything in a business that's being taxed is real property. And then the rest of that spread out intergovernmental, which would mostly be state aid and grants, that sort of thing, is 11.7%. That's the second biggest source. And everything else is small peanuts, right? License and permits, 1.6%, fines, 0.6%, small numbers compared to taxes and intergovernmental financial aid. And all these numbers come out of Danbury's 2021-2022 budget book that we plugged in to these charts. Next slide. All right, we're interested to see how Danbury stacks up compared to roughly comparable communities. So we picked a handful based upon size and geography. Norwalk and Stamford, being in Fairfield County, seem like they'd be fair comparisons. Waterbury's, not far up, 84, and New Britain's fairly comparable in size, just a little smaller than Danbury. So we chose those to compare, and what we see is that cities like New Britain and Waterbury have far less revenue coming from taxes, which suggests that a lot of that is being made up by intergovernmental or state aid. Whereas Norwalk and Stamford have a slightly higher share coming from taxes. And so right away, you can draw some pretty broad generalizations from this, in that the cities that are economically struggling are really dependent upon the state far more for their revenue stream. And the cities that are doing better financially and have experienced more growth over the past 10 years are less dependent and are more independent and from the perspective of revenue. Next slide. So if we take a look at Danbury's mill rate going back 10 or so years to 2013, we can see that the cities had a relatively stable mill rate, and the blue bars are the mill rate, and the gray line is the percentage growth. So from between 2013 and 2014, we see a fairly big jump there, and that's because there was a revaluation over that period, and the mill rate had to be increased to offset that revaluation. But since then, you've been operating under the same revaluation, basically the same assessed values on properties. And consequently, the mill rate's been very stable, and in fact has come down since 2018 to 27.6, where it's been for 4 budgets in a row. Compared to the statewide average, Danbury's is 4 points 4 percentage points lower. The statewide average is 31.3 mils. Next slide. Comparing Danbury to those same cities, what we see is a relatively low mill rate. And once again, we go back to, if you think back to the other slide I showed you about revenue sources, both New Britain and Danbury are generating less revenue from property taxes. So to try to make up for that, their mill rates are higher, just trying to get more out of the properties that they have on their grand list. Whereas Danbury has a lot more in common, both Norwalk and Stamford having a mill rate that is a little more comparable to the both of them. And with Norwalk being even lower, with last year's mill rate being 23.96. Next slide. So grand list, once again, grand list is the total assessed value of all the properties paying taxes. And what we see is from 2013 to 14 was that revaluation I talked about, where because of the market conditions following the 2008 recession, the value of properties across the country, across the region dropped. So the revaluation came back with lower values, which means Danbury had to correct by increasing the mill rate in 2014. And then slowly you can see that the grand list is growing, and much of that growth is attributed to reinvestment, redevelopment of property, new properties coming online and growing the grand list. So it's been growing consistently in value since 2014. Next slide. Tax levy per capita. Now this is, if you take the total taxes generated by the city from property tax and you spread that out per person, per capita, what you see is Danbury compared to Fairfield County and statewide is much lower, meaning the average resident of Danbury, their share, if those taxes were spread evenly across all residents, would be 2,400 or so, compared to Fairfield County, which is almost twice that, and Connecticut, which is a little more than 50% more than Danbury. I think everyone kind of has that sense. Danbury's known for being fairly fiscally conservative and for doing a good job of managing its mill rate and any increases in the mill rate. But even when you break it down per capita, Danbury has a much lower tax burden on its residents. Next slide. And when we compare it to those same cities, New Britain, Norwalk, Stamford, and Waterbury, we see that New Britain and Waterbury are lower, but that is because they have a much smaller share of their revenue coming from taxes. So they have a much smaller grand list, a much smaller tax levy as a whole, spread out among the residents that they do have. But when you compare Danbury to Norwalk and Stamford, which have large grand lists and are generating a lot more money or revenue from their tax base, you see that Danbury is much lower than either one of those, and actually looks a lot more like Waterbury. So right now you kind of have the best of both worlds in that you're not highly dependent on state aid. You have a pretty healthy grand list. You're managing your mill rate, and at the same time, you're managing to keep that tax burden per capita pretty low. Next slide. Now, when we take a look at how that transfers, how that revenue is spent, what we see is that Board of Education is a little north of 50% of the city's expenditures. And that's fairly typical. In some towns, it's around 60%. So there's nothing unusual about that. However, that means that less than half of the city's budget is available to the city's operations outside of schools. And And so that's our chart on the right. And public safety it has about a third of that budget, a little more than a third. Pension and benefits, roughly another third. And so the third that's left is split between general government, transferred out, that's transfers out to capital budgets, health and welfare, culture and recreation. They all have much smaller pieces of that pie. And these numbers all come straight from the budget book. And yeah, go ahead, Marcy, thanks. So educational expenditures. How does Danbury compare to our comparables? You're right there about in the middle. New Britain spends their share of the budget going towards educational expenditures is a couple percentage points higher. Norwalk is about a percentage point higher. Stamford's is about 4 percentage points lower, with Waterbury a little higher. So you're right about in the middle. So there's really nothing unusual about the share of the budget that's going to education. I think what I want to impress upon you is that the city provides all these other services outside of education, and its resources to do so are somewhat constrained by the school expenditures every year. Next. All right, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about capital projects, because this is really directly related to our work on the POCD in terms of building and maintaining facilities and infrastructure across the city. And this budget varies from year to year. Sharon's office runs the process or coordinates the process every year and helps put together the list, and then the city has to figure out what it can finance, what the priorities are from year to year. Within the city's budget, which this chart's pulled from, the capital improvements are categorized by the city's mission statement, which is broken up into 4 categories, each one being a slice of that pie. And the blue wedge there is to ensure superior quality of life for its citizens. The dark orange, to provide the most cost-effective municipal services. The gray, which is just a sliver, is preserving the cultural, historical, natural resources of the city. And the yellow is to enhance Danbury's position as a premier place to live, work, and raise a family. And I can tell you that that biggest piece of the pie in the most recent capital budget, it is an allocation going to schools. So we'll get into that. And that's about 89% of this capital budget is that slice of the pie. So next. And the total big picture there is 112 million for the capital budget of improvements that are being directly funded or bonded. So here's a list. I'm not going to read through all these. You can feel free to read through them. They're in the budget book. This came straight out of the budget book, and we'll put the presentation online if you want to dig into this. But to give you a sense as to in any given year what is being funded out of the capital improvement program, you have construction services covering athletic field improvements, bridge repairs, park improvements, emergency management facilities and operations, engineering. Most of the bridges are under engineering, public safety apparatus, vehicle replacement improvements, highway operations. IT is a very, very important and big part of the city's operations, and that infrastructure needs to be updated on an ongoing basis. Public building improvements, and much of that involves mechanical systems. And in both public and municipal buildings and schools, there's sewer fund or sewer infrastructure improvements. Next slide. So that's 7 million out of the budget. Another 3 million of more public safety, mostly, and infrastructure improvements. If we go to the next slide, you'll see this is the small piece of it that is cultural, historic, and natural resources, a little less than 500,000. And that's things like tree trimming, MS4, that's the stormwater permit compliance, Candlewood Town boat ramp, landfill improvements, water treatment facilities. These are the things that are getting funded and are part of the list of things that need to be done year in and year out within the city. And finally, the last slide, of this 100 million, much of it comes from a grant for the public schools, about 99 million. And there it is right there. It is multiple improvements to schools, including the Career Academy through the SNAP grant at the summit, and other improvements, including some of the downtown streetlight replacement, playscape replacement, and other parks and rec needs. Okay, so that's the list. And to give you a sense as to what those improvements look like, we'll go through on the next slide, next several slides, we'll go through some recent capital improvement projects, starting with Danbury High School. And there's the list of the rest of them. We'll flip through them one by one. So let's go to Danbury High School. In addition to Danbury High School, for Sharon, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was for the Freshman Academy and some other related improvements. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, right. Heritage Walk and Plaza. Some public realm improvements. Next slide is Roger Park tennis courts, and tennis courts were also improved at the high school. So let's go to the high school next. Danbury High School track and athletic field replacement. The tracks and the turf fields do not last forever. The lifespan varies, but a decade or just a little over a decade is a typical lifespan. And because these are facilities that are heavily used, this track is actually NCAA certified. It's a very high quality facility. Next slide. The Ellen Levy Animal Control Facility, which, as I understand, there's a generous donation that also helped make this possible. That's a recent improvement. And also fitness trails in some of the city's parks and along trails. Additionally, the work downtown. On the next slide, the Streetscape Renaissance Phase 1 work is capital funded, as are playground improvements such as the recently completed Pembroke school playground. In addition to the things that do get funded, the city maintains an unfunded capital improvement project list, and that is because various departments and divisions put forward a list of needs every year, and the Planning Commission reviews those and basically approves them. They get added to the list, which doesn't mean they're funded. That's another round. So that list builds. And so the city's often working through that list and completing projects, getting them funded. And as projects are completed and additional funding becomes available, those unfunded projects can be slotted in. Next slide. All right, so we talked a little bit about the schools. Danbury has a lot of schools, as you might expect for a city with its population. It has elementary schools distributed throughout the city, but most of them being central or northern part of the city. And 4 middle schools, if you include the ACE Academy, plus Danbury High School, which I think we all know to be the state's largest high school. Next slide. And because of population growth, those schools are heavily utilized. This map comes from a study that was done in 2019 by the Board of Education. It was the Comprehensive Enrollment Analysis and Projection Study. And I realize a lot has changed in 2 years because of COVID and some other migration trends, but this is some of the more recent data we have, and it's my understanding that the Board of Ed and public buildings they're looking at this issue again.
Oh, I think we lost him.
Uh-oh.
No, we're good. Well, I mean, I can jump in as well because Francisco and I obviously had some discussion about this, and as you may have read, the Board of Ed is looking at.
Utilization.
Yep. Are you back, Francisco?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Sorry, we lost you for a second. I was just saying
Okay.
that the Board of Ed was looking at updating the demographic analysis.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
in the
Yeah.
coming months.
Thanks, Sharon.
Sure.
And so what we see is that many of the elementary schools, and showing up in bright red there on the map, include, like for example, Ellsworth and South are at greater than 100% utilization. Now, Ellsworth Avenue School has a project under construction right now, and it will be completed in August of next year that will address the needs in that area, but there are still needs throughout the city. So this is a very important consideration with respect to growth. It is elementary school, specifically capacity. Now, the planned Danbury Career Academy is going to be a bit of a relief valve on the middle and high schools, but it's not going to directly address some of the issues at the elementary schools. All right, next slide. So what's driving this? Well, it's obviously enrollment growth, and that enrollment has grown steadily going back to 2008, 2009 school year. This graph came out of that enrollment study done in 2019. The last actual numbers they had for enrollment were based upon the 2019-2020 school year, in which case the city had
Oops.
Oh, we lost you again. Go back, yeah. So again, just to pick up on the last bullet, we got some recent numbers that were just reported by the Board of Education to the state. So with some pending enrollment, and that is, as you may know, students that haven't gotten their medical clearance to be able to be in school, that including those that they're anticipating, we're up over a little over 12,000 students.
Wow.
Again, the study, I think I actually lost Francisco. Let me just check one thing. So that study from Malone and McBroom back in 2009 took a look at what these communities and developments were generating in terms of school children, and they're relatively low numbers.
All right, Sharon, thanks.
Oh, sorry, you're back.
I'm back, and I really apologize. I'm sorry. It's the first time I've had an issue like this in a long time.
Okay.
So, I mean, Sharon knows these numbers as well as I do, but so what we want to answer the question is, where exactly is that growth coming from within the city? And the 2019 study did a really good job of taking a look at that. And the slide we're looking at now basically tells us that the big developments that the city's had, and when I talk about big developments, I mean some of the ones that are listed here, including Kennedy Flats, Abbey Woods, Arlington Woods, they are in fact contributing students to the school enrollment, but at a really low rate. At a low rate, when I talk about low rate, the Rivington is 0.02 students per unit. And the highest in here is Arlington Woods at 0.3, at less than a third of a student on average per unit. So if all those developments of the more than 2,000 housing units that came online through those developments, less than 200 additional students arrived. And that's the enrollment of students residing in those properties. What we don't know is whether or not they transferred from other parts of town. Some of those could be students that were already enrolled in the district and were just coming from other parts of town. So that doesn't necessarily mean that those are all new students. And if we go to the next slide, or the next, if you go to click ahead, when we break down the numbers on that, what we see is, and let's use Abbey Woods as an example. Marcy, go back if you could. Thanks. Abbey Woods generates 1.76 million in annual property tax revenue. And if you divide that across the students, the 82 students, what you get is a total tax revenue of over 21,000 per student. The cost of education per student is approximately 14,000 in Danbury. So even for the students that these developments are bringing to the school system, they're still generating more tax revenue than the cost to educate those students. All right, next slide. Now, still trying to answer the question of where is the student enrollment growth coming from? If we take a look at existing neighborhoods in Danbury, and in this case, the study referenced or pulled from a block on Osborne Street and another block on Rowan Street. What we see in those numbers are that the average household unit in these neighborhoods are generating closer to 2/3 or up to 1 student per household. So most of the growth in enrollment in the city is being driven by existing housing in the city, existing neighborhoods, and it's not necessarily being fueled by new growth. So as we see new subdivisions or apartment buildings arrive, they are bringing a very small share of the enrollment growth that the city is experiencing. Next slide. All right. So that concludes the presentation. I'm glad I got through it with only dropping off twice. We'd like to turn it over now to discussion like we usually do and hear from you in where you think the city's greatest needs are with respect to facilities and services. And I'll just open it up to whoever wants to chime in first. And Marcy, you can go ahead and turn it over to me because I know you have to jump on another meeting. However, because you do have to leave, it might make sense before we get into the discussion to update us on community engagement.
I can do that. No, I was just gonna call in, but not be at my computer. So I'm happy to do either. I'm happy to send it over to you because there's definitely a little bit of a delay with my clicking.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and cover, give us an update on community engagement. We'll come back to the discussion.
Okay, great, thanks. All right. So I just have 2 quick slides and I want to give you some updates as to what we've been doing. And so we've started our pop-up season, which before it gets too cold. And we've gone out twice already and we have 1 more on the horizon at the end of this month. And what we did was we attended the farmers market the past 2 Fridays. Well, not the past 2 Fridays, the 24th and 15th. And I would say the goal primarily is to hear from people the question that Francisco just asked, you know, what do you like about Danbury? What do you want to improve? But we're also driving people to the survey. And that is why we've waited until now to go out. And, you know, speaking of the survey, before I get into some of the information that we've been hearing and, you know, one of the other things that we're gonna do coming up is some focus stakeholder groups, and Francisco and Sharon, I believe, are starting to collaborate on planning those. So I mentioned the survey. For those of you who have gone on and taken it, we appreciate it. Thank you, or shared this information with others. So far, we've had over 700 people fill it out and respond to us. And that's pretty good. And we've had a handful of Spanish and Portuguese responses as well. So, and we are promoting it in all 3 languages. We did send information out via various social media sites through the city and other related projects in Danbury. We're giving out business cards at the pop-up. So, and I think we've gone through about half of those. So that's good. People are taking them and probably going home and taking the survey. And And so I think that's great. One of the things that I'm just going to chime in, and I haven't pursued the survey details yet, so I can't really give you a report on what we're hearing there yet. But at the pop-ups, we're hearing a lot of different things. So we've been to the farmers market, and people are really coming out. That's one thing I have to say that's great about Danbury. The people that are coming out and talking to us, they know about what's going on in town, and they're not just talking to us about this project, they're talking about other things. And people like the farmers market. Sometimes it's a social place. One of the things that we are hearing about, a general theme that I'll throw out there, is the conditions of the roads. Better maintenance is coming up. It's come up a handful of times, and wear and tear on vehicles. The other thing that I think we've heard a lot of is affordable housing. So we are hearing that a little bit by people who are coming out. And then on the flip side, and I think this goes along with all of the tax discussion, is, we did get a little bit of praise on city services, and that Danbury does offer a lot, and maybe some of that needs to be marketed better. So I'll throw out some of that stuff for you to pursue as you get into this next phase of your discussion. Any questions for me? Silence.
I'll just interject and say that we're planning at the end of this next week, actually, to be at a local restaurant sitting outside, a very busy local restaurant, and sitting outside during the day with kind of the same, asking the same questions. And I just think there might be a different demographic we might be able to reach. And again, we're continuing to look at opportunities to do pop-ups, as we proceed, and also share the survey link with everybody. And I appreciate, I know Juan's done some sharing as well as Rich and Ellie. So we appreciate all that. I've also been in touch, it's at the library. We've been in touch with the senior center. We're going to be in touch with Danny Hayes to see if there's a better way to get the survey to the veterans who may not be as computer savvy, but maybe he can help them along if they, go to the veterans building. So, as Marcy said, we're trying every way we can to try to get people interested in and take it. And I am following up on the high school because I think it'll be interesting. And, kids, the younger adults are more computer savvy than probably the rest of us. So it's easy for them. They'll probably take it during class.
Well, and Sharon, when you talk to the veterans group, if it's helpful for us to print out some copies and and come back and pick them up, we can do that too. Just let us know what they suggest.
Yeah,
that's
I
always
will do that. Yep.
Can I interject that with a comment in regards to the veterans?
Sure. I will.
I'm involved with a lot of the veteran organizations in town, and most of us have buildings that we own through our nonprofits. So we can also, there's something maybe that can be done as hosting an event there at these organizations. I'm like an example, I'm a member at the VFW. We have a huge hall that seats over 100 people. That could be a viable option for us to host an event there and invite all the veteran community out to the post, and then give that information out or help them in any way. And then my question that I had is, are we doing anything in regards to social media? Do we have a social media account or accounts that we can then share and spread the word with?
So we did not set up an individual social media account for this project, but we have advertised on other social media accounts. So the city has advertised on our behalf, as well as other longer term projects like the I-84 Danbury project. They've advertised for us, Westcog. So we're kind of using our feelers for people who already have existing followings. Because for this length of a project, we do think it would probably be good to use other social media accounts user bases and get posts on there. Can I back up?
Okay, thank you.
related to the VFW, you said, do you have any planned events, and can we potentially talk offline about maybe setting up a table at an already planned event in the future?
Yes, actually, we have an event next month, at the beginning of the month. If you like, I can shoot you a
Yeah.
private message through the Zoom with my contact information, and then we can touch base.
Great, thanks, Juan. That would be awesome.
Not a problem.
All right, so Francisco, I'm going
Yeah.
to stop sharing. I will continue to listen in though.
Yeah, thanks, Marcy. And Rory's going to share her screen just in case I have an issue again. Rory will take notes as we talk. Okay. Yeah, Rory, can you just throw those into the notes category because we don't need them on this page. It's just related outreach. Yeah, just cut them from there and paste them below. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so going back to our discussion about city facilities and services, tell me, what do you perceive to be Danbury's needs now and looking out over the next several years?
This is Arnie. First of all, Francisco, very nice presentation. I'm always fascinated at how much I learn from these. You know, those of us who have been around Danbury our whole lives think we know more than we actually do. So well done. Thank you.
Thanks, Arnie.
I was, one of the slides that stayed with me was the number of students being generated by these larger condominium and apartment complexes over on the west side, Rivington, Abbey Woods, whatever have you. So much for the argument that those are overwhelming our school system, because they don't appear to be doing that. So the students are not coming from there, they're coming from other places. And I vaguely remember, Sharon, you telling a story about some school where these parents just show up with their kids on day one to enroll them with nothing. And just curious as to if the kids aren't coming from the larger condo complexes and apartment complexes, where are they coming from? And where are they living? And is this a trend that's going to continue?
So if you go back to the 2019 study, I mean, the area around Osborne Street, those are 2, 3, 4 families. You know, there's a lot of people in them. You drive up and down Osborne Street in the morning, there's 10 to 15 kids on every corner waiting to be picked up. So, you know, I think it's again, not the big, more recent developments, which is not what people think. It's the 3 families, maybe 4 families, you know, in downtown area. I could tell you that the schools on the recent, and I'm just looking at my chart, on the recent numbers we got from the school district, on an elementary basis, you know, Morris Street and Park Avenue saw increases from last year. So if you think about where those schools are, there's nothing gigantic new being built in that area. So it's that we have larger number, our family size is increasing, and they're residing in those areas of the city.
What was what's the growth rate on the total number of students in the Danbury school system? I can't, somebody put out the number, I think it was 12,000, was it something? Is that growing exponentially or is it growing modestly?
Yeah, let's, Rory, can you go back to slide 36? And we'll take a closer look at that.
It's also trending down a little bit, I think.
Yeah,
It is. We're a little
ahead,
bit lower
Paul.
than
Yeah.
we were a couple of years ago.
Right, exactly.
Wow, okay, interesting.
And also, Sharon, this is Richard Gianelli. Just recently, I think your numbers had, with the 200 people that were still waiting to get on the, you know, to register, I think we hit about 12,040. And as a percentage over last year, it was like almost 2%, 1.93%. I tend to think in the last 2 years, that percentage was low. And I say that personally because of the restrictions on travel due to COVID. My feeling is that, and this is only a supposition on my part, that once we're through this COVID crisis and travel resumes to a normal situation, I think we're going to start seeing additional bumps higher than the current 1 to 2%. The growth we've had and still are experiencing are in the elementary schools. And the concern, as you said earlier, was the board or the sites and facility meeting gave the superintendent the okay to do another study relative to the demographics and demographies. We're just overburdened in our elementary schools. Many of them, when you look at Park Avenue, I want to say that's about 650 kids. Most of the schools we have are at capacity. And just the recent school that we opened up in Brookfield for the kindergarten schools, we had to take those kids from 3 schools. I think it was South Street, Stanley Ruff, and I forget the other one, that we pooled those 3 schools and took kids out of that so we can create the kindergarten class there. So it's still continuing to experience an enrollment, plus the space issue. We have, we're at capacity with many of these schools, or over capacity, large classrooms, and it continues to be a problem. One of the things, that I've experienced in my term on the board is that when we, and Antonio, I think will back me up on this, is when we go to construct the school, the state has some formula where you have to use historical data, and that sort of suppresses our enrollment growth. So the state will not allow us or fund us in order to allow us to build the school for what we think the projections would be, based on more current forecasts. So my feeling has always been every time we're building a school, it's sort of antiquated because it's old, it's at capacity because the data was, outstanding data. But Danbury still in the downtown area is experiencing the growth of the students. I was very impressed to see that the slide you had where it takes the property tax contributed to some of these condominiums on the west side versus the number of students in there and a contribution in terms of taxes per student. That was a very interesting statistics. But we are still struggling for increased growth. We're one of the 2 or 3 districts in the state of Connecticut that has continued growth. And we're just, in a quandary is to what to do for more schools. There's talk about the possibility of looking into additional elementary school, but again, it'll depend on the studies that come out. So, where it seems like every year we're in the same situation, although we're building new facilities. That academy. The academy will hold some 1,400 kids, 1,100 will be slotted for the high school and 300 for the middle school. So that'll ease some of the burden, and that'll of course be on a lottery system. But that's just for an update for you.
So Richard, let me ask you this. What should be the city's response to this, or what do you think the POCD should recommend? Is that the city needs to do a better job managing growth so it doesn't outgrow its facilities, or it needs to be building more robust facilities to accommodate the growth that it's experienced?
I think the latter. The other thing too is Mark did a good job and through the legislative body and in terms of taking the facility at the Matrix. That's a renovation. And to my understanding, that's one of the only new buildings that have not been an existing building that was renovated. If we can get more funding or to have the laws changed so that the possibility of looking at other commercial sites that are available in the city and renovate those for schools and get the reimbursement. That would certainly help. To build a new school is phenomenally expensive. And if and I certainly think renovating something may be less expensive. I also think that the city and the Board of Ed need to work closer together, more than once a year when they do budgets, in terms of looking at what the needs are and work to a common goal to facilitate this. It shouldn't be a shotgun approach. We're trying to do that, and I think in the last 3 or 4 years, it's we've accomplished some of that communication, and hopefully it'll continue. But it's kind of, I also think and feel that some of the roadblocks we've had, and I said earlier, is when you do the studies to build the school, the data is on poor data. So the state should allow us to build something where it is built on our projection more currently than something that's skewed downward, based on some historical times when maybe you haven't had as high of growth potential as you had now. So those are things that, I think legislatively should be done. I believe all this is known, and the people in their respective, positions are looking to do that. But I think the more openness that the board has in getting the community and the municipality involved in its needs brings this to a better conclusion. And the more you work on it for the future, rather than do as a shotgun type situation, I think it's a better planning process.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Anyone else, any thoughts with respect to facility needs and or service needs in the city?
Helen Hofstetter would like to just say something.
Yes, Helen.
Okay. The concern we have for the growth with the schools, and that maybe we're not being accurate. That's a very good point based on the way we do it. It probably extends as well to the availability of teachers and the need to increase those and potentially other staff and especially in the area of ESL curriculum. So I was wondering, I don't have children in school myself right now, and I guess I won't, but I maybe other people have thoughts about whether there's a shortage now or will there be, and what kind of planning we need to do to make sure we have the number of teachers we need and the right skills.
Yeah, that's the right. The human resource part of this is the other side of the equation, beyond, obviously, well beyond the facility needs themselves. Yep.
So there's an operating component too, right? So there's facilities, kind of the hard development and maintenance and continued maintenance of those facilities. And then there's an operational side, what does it cost for the teachers and things like that. So, it's both. Oh, we lost your note.
Francisco?
Yes.
Vinny, go ahead, Vinny.
This is Vinny DiGilio from the council. Regarding the actual facilities, the physical space that I think this is focused on, going back to Arnie's initial comments are spot on. We always learn something doing this and reviewing these type of things. Danbury, going back to Sharon's comments with some of the downtown and the multifamily, where ultimately we see, at least what's presented to us in the discussions we have with the council, having the denser neighborhoods contributing significantly to the overcrowding in some of the schools, Morris Street, Park Avenue, Ellsworth, South Street. Those are the ones oversubscribed and distributed accordingly. So obviously that's a big swell in the elementary schools, which then leads to the middle schools and the high schools, and it
Right.
kind of moves through. The bubble moves through. So
It does.
I think a lot of the need is currently obviously when studies are based upon, or decisions are based upon studies that are inaccurate, or there are more students that show up than expected, that changes everything. But assuming we have accurate information and the proper planning and those type of things, you wind up seeing that the need is the space to address overcrowding for children, and that's the bulk of what's currently in process right now. I mean, between the Career Academy that Mr. Gianelli spoke about at about 1,400 students, and the Ellsworth expansion, and I believe that was 500 or 600 students. All in all, there's about 2,000 new seats being created in that elementary, middle, and high school demographics. So there's 2,000 students, 2,000 seats coming online and currently in process. And you went back before in the slide, you had mentioned, talked about the capital improvement side of things and the city's budget there, and the lion's share is heavily focused on the school buildings, upgrades, renovations, et cetera. So from my perspective, and in working with all the departments in the budgets, our greatest needs when it comes to facilities and services has to do with the education, and showing that the lion's share of all the capital work the city does that's outside the school budget, as well as the 2,000 seats currently in process across a couple different projects, I think really supports that. And then, of course, there's the pre-K programs that were moved to Granville Avenue with some consolidation and renovation work with that third party there that speaks to the opportunity to do more of those type of things, like Mr. Gianelli also said. So where I see the biggest need for facilities and services, I also see that those are the biggest things currently going on and being addressed for current and future budgets. So I just think, these things, I don't say no problem solves itself, but the process is being worked on to address it.
So let me ask you this, Vinny. The city is actively working towards addressing the school enrollment numbers and the utilization numbers. Do you feel that the plans that the city has right now, and you mentioned the Career Academy and the Ellsworth Avenue School, do you think it's going to be enough, or do you think there's more work that needs to be done to adequately accommodate the students in Danbury now, and that may be here in 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
That's a great question. I think it's probably best supported with some updated study for some of the trendings. But at my glance, based upon what we've seen and are being presented, I think what's on the table right now serves the most immediate needs over the next couple years. Going further than a couple of years, will require some more information. A lot of some of the creativity that's part of this has to do with some uncharted territory with some amazing reimbursements and those type of things. So as those things happen, they're able to be done more quickly without out of the ground type of construction work and more repurposing and renovating. But yeah, it's a great question. I think for the next couple of years, few years, it should be fine. Longer term, I think, we're going to have to rely on some studies and see how the next few years go.
Okay. Can I comment?
Richard.
I agree with Vinny. My suggestion, and Vinny's correct. I would just say what we've been doing in the city has been very helpful, in turning around projects for the Board of Ed and as well as working with us. But we've been band-aiding things, and what we need to do is a little bit more sophistication in terms of looking ahead. I was going to suggest that I'm just a board member, and it might be to get a better perspective on the schools and where they look to be, of maybe, I don't want to say their wish list, but what they look at as future needs is to get a hold of Kevin Walston, the superintendent, and have a conversation, with him, with perhaps Sharon and Francesco, and ask him these questions, because, he's the one that we pay the salary to, and he's the one that's got the headaches. I just attend, meetings, bi-weekly, but I think, and that's why I said before, if you work with the people that are actively involved in this, he can give you, from what his perspective is, an opinion or consensus is the direction as to where we should go. I think it would be very worthwhile.
Yeah, we can definitely do that, Rich. In fact, last week while we were preparing this, I reached out to Kevin and asking him, because I knew that it was October and the enrollment numbers were due to the state, and the next morning I had them. So, Francisco and I can set something up to have a discussion with him about that.
Great, thank you.
I did want to circle back and just get some comments from anybody on, we understand, I think we've talked about our educational needs, but, we have, Tim's on the line, Tim Nolan's here. We continue to fund paving programs. It's just, we have to maintain our roads. There's other public buildings that we need to ensure or maintain. There's public safety. There's, fire. We understand about the fire department headquarters and where it sits and the age of it, and and looking at that. And I know Arnie and Perry and Helen see those every year on the capital list. We have a discussion about public safety, about funding vehicles and things like that that have a longer term lifespan as part of a program to fund a program, so they have available funds when they need it for equipment, things like that. So just to kind of sort of circle back to kind of the other city infrastructure. Bridget's on the line. I know she has I think she's still here. Yeah. About, historic buildings that the city owns and that they help us maintain. And so just trying to spur some other conversations too, as well.
But if you like me to jump, I certainly can jump in.
Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
For Public Works, it feels like we may have been over some of this ground before when we discussed transportation. But obviously, roads are in a program of replacement and maintenance. But some of the things we don't see under the roads, such as utilities, don't get the attention that they deserve, because they're used 24/7, sewer, water, other utilities that are privately held that need to be maintained and replaced once they're done with their useful life. Obviously, roads includes bridges, curbs, and sidewalks, which planning and maintaining as the city grows and more vehicles are on the road, it directly contributes to how quickly a road becomes past its useful life. So, that's part of it, but also buildings. I mean, I know Sharon just mentioned the fire department on New Street. I believe we're looking at that in terms of when and where and how that could be replaced. But the Public Works complex was built in the 30s. It's probably the oldest complex the city owns. So that's something we have to look at, proper usage of the property over here to improve a Public Works complex. I think that going forward, we have to look at new technologies possibly for the work that we do in Public Works. We've seen in the last 20 or 30 years improvements in equipment and technologies, which allows us to do more work, higher quality work, training, so on and so forth, so that the Public Works professionals are not your grandfather's Public Works professionals. They're all highly trained workforce. And we like to see that trend continue. I'm not certain, I'm not going to look at a crystal ball. I'm not certain how much more it could change, but I'm sure it will. we'll start to see, electric vehicles and other fuels and different ways of doing public works. But I think that covers it all. Basically, to surmise, it's constantly used. It's a 24/7 service for safety. So it's going to have to be rebuilt and maintained on a set program. And that's all the facilities that Public Works takes care of.
Yeah. Sharon, can we put a plug in for affordable senior housing?
Yeah, we had this discussion yesterday as well about on the housing and yeah, well, Francisco will update you on that as well.
I know if Joe's here, he would mention that. So I was just doing it.
Yep.
So let me ask you this. There's obviously a wide array of needs with respect to infrastructure, facilities, services. There's capital improvement needs, maintenance needs, operational needs. What's the general sense that people have? Is the city keeping up with those needs? Is it falling a little behind? Does it have the resources to stay adequately in front of or on top of those needs? Help me understand where you folks perceive the city being in terms of keeping up with all of these investment and maintenance responsibilities.
Francisco, Paul Rotello.
Yeah, Paul.
Just a comment about that. Let me turn the camera back on. My take on the direction of Danbury is pretty simple. It's pretty binary. Growth can be a management crisis. It's not anywhere near that place yet in Danbury. It's a management problem. But contraction, this goes back to the question that you posed earlier, should we be somehow retarding growth or managing it? Shrinkage, contraction is an existential crisis. And it's something that we're very much aware of in Danbury. We're surrounded by communities that are shrinking. We don't want that to happen in Danbury. Shrinking leads to a smaller grant list, and it generally leads to a request for more services, more social services. So you have to do more with less money. Growth, on the other hand, is a little bit different. You need more services, but you also, by growing, I mean, just as an example, we're putting a proton center on the top of Worcester Heights, and that will probably contribute somewhere in the vicinity of $1.5 to $2 million per year in property taxes. Now, that's about half of what it costs to run a single elementary school. So 2 of those buildings could cover the entire operating costs of one elementary school without burdening a homeowner taxpayer at all. And that kind of growth of the reduction of friction that has allowed businesses like that to relocate to Danbury. We're getting one in very shortly from Bridgewater. They could have gone anywhere. They're coming to Danbury with 75 employees. That kind of stuff we can do. We do that pretty well. It may lag the growth by a couple of years, but eventually it catches up. The alternative, and we could do this too, and communities actually do it actively, Reading, Easton, Weston. They actually discourage growth, but the taxpayers and the property owners, the homeowner taxpayers are comfortable with that, and they're willing to step up and pay for that out of their own pocket. In Danbury, we use this different model. We are to some extent victims of our own success. It's becoming so frictionless to move to Danbury, and it's so pro-business that people are coming in and bringing employees and the families of employees, and this is beginning to, or has been for quite a while, burdening the school system among other facilities. But with that growth, as you notice with the West Side numbers, generally, even with residential, the total tax revenue is higher than what it costs to educate the students. In addition to that, we are doing things that really have never been done before, like a student impact fee at the summit, where they're paying $500,000 a year and not sending a single student to Danbury. So I think that I let Tim and the infrastructure people talk about the facilities that are needed, but in terms of revenue, and basically really what we're talking about is a revenue issue. Do we have the money to manage this growth and to satisfy it? I think the answer to that is we'll always be a couple of years behind, but eventually we will catch up, and we will be able to manage it both financially and with the infrastructure and with the schools. We're also doing things like sending kids, as Richard mentioned, outside of Danbury. Been an advocate of that for quite some time. We're experimenting with that this year. I think it's doable. I think that we're doing it. And I think at the end of the day, it's just a lot better to encourage the growth and manage, as difficult as it can be, the expansion than to, God help us, have to deal with contraction.
All right, Paul, thank you. Yeah, I mean, you took it head on. That's a very real issue. And when you take a look at cities such as Waterbury, New Britain, which we compared Danbury to, they experience pretty considerable population loss, and the effects of that have lingered for decades now. That much of that population loss was following World War II and in the decades following, and they have yet to recover from that loss. So that's an incredibly important point that you make. All right. Anyone else, any comments or questions at all with respect to the city's buildings and facilities and the services that it provides? Anything you wish Danbury would provide that it doesn't currently provide, or maybe a service or facility you wish were a lot better in Danbury?
I don't see any raising any hands.
Okay. Well, we've asked the public these questions too through the survey, and so we expect we'll have a lot of input to share with you with respect to those types of questions. All right. I think we've.
Hey, sorry guys, if I could type in, I was trying to unmute. This was brought up yesterday. I thought it was a good point. Perhaps we have a little lack of funding in the zoning enforcement area, where maybe we could enforce some of the things we've set out. We just had a little more manpower. So that was one area of deficiency that was raised yesterday. And for me, I know we have such great resources and amenities. I'd love to see them marketed better, so people felt like we did, because we definitely do have great things to offer. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Barry. All right. We've fleshed it out pretty good. We'll take these notes and tighten them up a little bit to better focus on the list of needs. And as a reminder, these presentations will all be put on the project website. And Rory, can you go ahead and skip through the slides that Marcy already presented to key stakeholder interviews? We have been on an ongoing basis for the past month or more, have been reaching out to department heads and commission members and having discussions, half hour to 1 hour discussions with them about what the needs are and what they do and how their operations work. And so we're getting a lot of insight into the city's operations. And I saw that Roger's on the call, and Roger and I have been playing a mean game of back and forth. Our schedule hadn't been lining up, but Roger, I did get your email today. Thanks. And I'll reach out to you. Tomorrow's looking good for me, and as is the rest of the week. So hopefully we can connect then. I have to say this, everyone that I've spoken with has been incredibly helpful and has really impressed upon me their knowledge of what they do, of the inner works of Danbury, and the love and their personal level of commitment to the work and to the city. It's something I can't say I've really experienced that in any other city to the degree that I have in Danbury. It's been remarkably impressive, and everyone I've spoken with to date has been incredibly helpful and generous with their time. And we have a lot more people to touch base with, but it's really been incredibly beneficial to the process so far. Moving on to update you on some of the parallel things that are happening. We talked about this a little bit already, is the Affordable Housing Plan. And as a reminder, the state is mandating all of the cities, the state's towns and cities to produce a plan by June 1st of 2022. And so we're off the ground and running and developing Danbury's Affordable Housing Plan. We had our second meeting yesterday, and this one's going to move pretty quick because we're really benefiting from all of the work that has already been done for the POCD and with you over the past almost year now. So we'll keep you informed of that as we go. And once again, we're looking to have that completed by April. And next slide, the survey we have, as we mentioned, it's been a full court press in trying to get the survey out. And there is a link to the survey on our project website. So if you want to refer someone to the survey and you don't have the link handy, just tell them to go to danburypocd.com and they can click on that link and they can get to the survey there. And finally, last couple of slides, closing things out here, our schedule. We're a little more than halfway through the process now. We're nearing the end of our discovery process, and that will be winding down with next month's meeting. And we're starting to pivot towards actually putting together the basic architecture of the plan. So as we get into the new year and even as early as December, we're going to start thinking about how the plan should look and what we want to try to tackle with the plan and how that information should be organized. And our very next steps for the next meeting will be a focus on economic development. So it's all the more imperative that I connect with Roger before then. RKG, our sub-consultant, will be taking a deeper dive into economic development, building upon some of the housing analysis work that they've done and focusing a little more on the commercial side of things. We are continuing, as I mentioned, to conduct interviews, and we are planning for focus group meetings. The focus groups are intended to be small format meetings of 6 to 12 people, and right now those are likely to be online in a small format meeting that really allows for everyone to participate in the discussion. And we're looking to do 5 or 6 of those around topics that we've been covering in the plan that are very familiar to you now: economic development, housing, infrastructure, those types of topics. We are still populating the list of people to invite to those meetings. And Sharon and I are going to talk about, are going to try to finalize that. And I think we may reach out to all of you for some ideas if we need some help in filling seats as it may be. So please pay attention to any emails that might come from Sharon regarding the focus group meetings over the next month. We are looking to do those as early as late November and maybe as late as December, depending on people's schedules and availability. So that's our next big outreach effort. And then we're continuing all of our other work. So going ahead to the last slide, our next meeting, we will meet on the 16th of November, once again, Tuesday at 4 o'clock. And we'll be talking about economic development at that meeting. And that'll get us done in time to enjoy the Thanksgiving holiday. So with that said, that concludes our presentation. And I'd like to open it back up to any last comments or questions before I hand it over to Sharon to close out the meeting.
Good meeting, well done.
Thanks, Arnie. Yeah, I don't see anybody chiming in, so I think we're
Okay.
good. Thank you, Francisco. Yeah, really good. And again, they've done some really great work, and we really appreciate it. And it's been a real collaborative effort with everybody on their team, and we have a good team here. So I appreciate all the department heads and everybody from the outside and outside the organizations for helping in this discovery process. Okay, so with that, I think we have 15 people. So absent Rory and Francisco, if I'll go back to the meeting minutes, if everybody's okay, and if no one has any comments, I'll take a motion to accept the meeting minutes from September 21st.
Make a motion to accept.
Thank you. Motion by Bridget.
Second, Arnie.
Second by Arnie. All in favor, signify by
Aye.
saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Great, thank you. Motion carried. The minutes are approved. And with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Thank you again, everybody.
Motion to adjourn, Helen.
Helen, second.
Richard. will
Hold on,
second.
I second it.
Yeah.
Oh, Tim, second by Tim. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, thanks, everybody. We're
Thank you,
adjourned.
everyone.